distance uses for hunting, fishing, for natural resource exploitation, not for mining. In 2005, when the state of Alaska redid the area plan, it deleted out many of the protections that were there. That the revised plan has been challenged by several tribes and was litigated in the state of Alaska courts. And the state of Alaska had to go back and redo some of that area plan. And comments have closed on that. If anybody's interested, the citizens of Bristol Bay have come up with a citizens alternative to what the Alaska Department of Natural Resources has done. They think that their alternative is more, they know that their alternative is more protective, and think that it's a better approach to what the Department of Natural Resources has on the books right now. And you can just Google Citizens Alternative to the Bristol Bay Area Plan if you'd like more information on that. I have another question, and that's, if Pebble Mine is successful in opening, what timeline before you see an effect on the water supply and the salmon population? That's a really good question. So before it opens, it has to get permits, and of course, it's already being challenged. So let me go back to the permit challenging. Let's just assume that the state of Alaska grants Pebble Mine its permits, and we're pretty sure that that will happen because the state of Alaska has not said no to any large-scale mine. And the state of Alaska employees from the Department of Natural Resources were actually on PBS's Frontline talking about Pebble, and actually said, you know, if they jump through all the hoops, we'll have no choice but to permit it. So, okay, the state of Alaska is going to permit it. There are very little federal permits at issue here. One is the Clean Water Act, which is why we're pushing EPA so hard. But let's just say they get all of their permits necessary and they open. We know that as soon as they start digging, there's going to be immediate impacts to the water supply and to salmon populations. How do I know this? Because EPA's watershed assessment estimated that even without any catastrophic failures, even without any leaks, even if the mine operated permanently, just to operate it and to get the water it needs to dig the pit, to dewater the pit, to dewater all of the tailings, upwards to 90 miles of salmon streams will be eliminated, and 4,500 acres just gone, just by building the mine. And that's not if anything happens. That's if everything is operationally correct. You'll see immediate impacts to both water supply and salmon populations if Pebble is built. I have another question. Can you speak to the bankers, investors of the proposed mine? Is there a question as to how much money they would potentially gain, and do they have an active lobbying effort? These are all good questions, and I think I'll break up that question into several parts. The backers, investors of the proposed mine are foreign mining companies, Anglo-American, Rio Tinto, and Northern Dynasty Minerals. Right now, they've been paying out of pocket for expenses. The CEO of the Pebble Limited Partnership, John Shively, has said they've put in almost $600 million to develop it so far. They haven't even hit permitting yet. Oh, and that reminds me to go back to the permitting question from before. But eventually, these mining companies are going to have to go and get financing, and we are targeting their financing. There are certain banks that have traditionally financed Anglo-American operations in the past, and we have asked them to take a look at Pebble Mine. We've raised the environmental risks, the risks to investors, the reputational risks should banks lend money, and all of the regulatory risks involved, and kind of packaged this up and presented it to the banks as how this could potentially be a violation of their own environmental and socially responsible investment frameworks that all of these banks have. One other thing to mention when we're talking about financing is that, typically if you get financing from, let's say, the World Bank or any other private bank, um, you really need the go ahead from the local communities. There are UN treaties and resolutions on this, and quite frankly, they do not have it in Bristol Bay. I was going through some stats earlier, but over 80% of the residents and Alaska natives oppose this project. So there is no community support, there is no community buy-in, and that's a real problem for socially responsible investment. And this is such a big issue that just recently a group of 27 investors representing over $35 billion in assets wrote to EPA telling EPA of their concerns with the Pebble mine. They're concerned, these are people that are looking to get a profit, even though they're socially responsible investors. And they wrote to EPA with their concerns of Pebble mine. Other folks have shown concern. The jewelry industry, for instance, Earthworks has run a really great campaign focused on no dirty gold and protecting Bristol Bay, and over 60 jewelers whose bread and butter is obviously gold, silver, resource extraction, have pledged not to source gold from Pebble Mine should it ever get built. There's a fine line here with all of these companies who are out for profits, who do want to make money, and they're saying that there's something so wrong with Pebble Mine that they will not source their gold. So Tiffany's, Hellsberg, Zales, like some of the really big retailers have pledged not to source gold from Pebble Mine. So that's a very long-winded answer to the investor question, but yes, we are targeting it. We're working very hard on that front. The second part to that question was how much money could they potentially gain? A lot. If fully developed, Pebble Mine could be worth upwards to $350 billion. I'd want to juxtapose that though, because that is a finite resource. Once the minerals are extracted, they're gone. Yes, it's a big windfall for some of these foreign mining companies, but juxtapose that with the very renewable and viable commercial salmon fishery that's in Bristol Bay right now, that's generating $1.5 billion annually. And that's renewable. That, if managed correctly, which it is, it could last forever, as opposed to the 50-year lifespan of this mine. And then there was a third part to that question, and that was, do they have an active lobbying effort? Yes. The Pebble Limited Partnership has thrown over $100 million into lobbying. They've hired several lobbyists in Washington, D.C., in Alaska. I don't work in Juneau, nor am I involved on the in-state lobbying efforts, but Trout Unlimited has done really great work there. And they can tell you how many lobbyists Pebble has on a daily basis going around both Capitol Hill and the state legislature in Juneau. And they are spending a lot of money to push this mine. Okay, I have another question, and that's, it seems that the general public, animals, and natural areas are losing out more and more to development. Yes, I like this. I like where this is going. The state of Alaska seems to be pro-development, pro-exploitation of resources. How do you change this anti-environmental attitude of politicians and pro-business? There is no question that Alaska is very pro-development. Resource extraction is written into the state constitution, and that's just a fact. I think what we have to do to shift this consciousness is to really focus in on what projects are actually beneficial. What projects do we need as a society? We do need copper. We don't necessarily need gold, but we do need copper. A lot of green energy is dependent on copper, but there are other copper mines that can produce in safer environments, in dry environments, in arid regions like the Southwest, southwestern states of North America, not in very wet tundra conditions. It's basically like a big bog up there. All of the water is interwoven. This is just the wrong spot for the mine. So I think we have to shift the consciousness and talk about why this mine is bad in this place, and that's the starting point. Interestingly enough, the state of Alaska recognized the importance of Bristol Bay and the Bristol Bay fishery when it created in 1975, when the state legislature looked very different than it does today. It created a Bristol Bay Fisheries Reserve, and the Fisheries Reserve just basically requires legislative approval before oil and gas can be developed. So I think one of the long-term solutions to this problem is to, have a similar requirement for mining. There's no reason why oil and gas should be prohibited up in Bristol Bay, and not large-scale mining that could have equally catastrophic impacts to the fisheries and to the reserve. That will require a shift in consciousness in the Alaska State Legislature. And, it is a partisan issue, although one very famous Alaskan, former Senator Ted Stevens, was on record for saying that Pebble Mine was he was against it, and it was going to be a disaster. And, he's very pro-mining, but he was not pro-Pebble. I have another question. I'm curious as to why you are passionate about this topic. What got you interested in protecting the environment? I am very passionate about this topic, and mainly animals. So all of you probably have some sort of visceral connection with these cams. You can see the bears, you can see the salmon. This is why I got involved. I went to law school after an internship at a place called the Fund for Animals, which has since merged with the Humane Society. And I was a congressional lobbyist at the time. We were lobbying for dolphin-safe tuna, which eventually passed, yay. And I found it to be incredibly tedious and very, very hard work. And there was a lawyer in the office who brought cases, and I thought, this is the way to do it. It's very difficult to stomp around Capitol Hill, but to make an effective change, we can do that through the courts. So that's why I went to law school. I ended up working at a law firm in DC for about 6 years, actually 2 different law firms for about 6 years, practicing environmental law, but it really wasn't my passion. And what I really set out to do was protect animals. So I left there. I had a short stint as a dolphin trainer, and then found my way to the Natural Resources Defense Council, where I get to live my dream every day. I'm doing what I went to law school to do, and that's bring litigation and work on advocacy campaigns where we are doing our best to protect wild lands, to protect wild places, and to protect the animals that are in them. We originally got involved in Pebble Mine, believe it or not, because of belugas. And I haven't mentioned those yet, mainly because I'm on a bear and salmon cam right now. But what Pebble would propose to do is put a port on the Cook Inlet side of the mine to get the gold and copper out to the rest of the world. And this would increase shipping traffic through Cook Inlet. You'd build a giant terminal. You'd increase the amount of ships and the size of ships that are coming into Cook Inlet. And you do all of this right in the midst of critical habitat for Cook Inlet beluga whales. Cook Inlet belugas are one of the most endangered species on the planet. There's only around 300 of them left, and NRDC has been campaigning for years to help that population rebound. We started by trying to get them on the endangered species list. Since I've been here, we've the feds have actually protected them. The state of Alaska challenged that ESA listing. We helped defend it. It's still there. And now the National Marine Fisheries Service has designated critical habitat. unfortunately, where Pebble would like to build their port is right in the middle of critical habitat for beluga whales. So that's how we first started looking at this issue back in 2008. NRDC got involved in a major way in 2009, although people and groups, and particularly locals, have been aware of this project for many, many, many more years, and there's some really great people in state working on this. One other question is, will the citizens of Alaska get paid a yearly fee on all the natural resources removed as they do on oil? And do you think this is a good policy for the state? So numbers vary on this, and the answer is no. The oil and gas fund is very, very different from the royalties that mining companies have to pay. I've heard it told different from different economists, and I don't want to hold myself out as an expert on this, but from what I've heard, the royalties that end up getting paid back to the state are actually very little, because it is an after taxes, after profit. So the number is very small. It goes back to the state. The citizens wouldn't collect on it in the same way as they do for oil and gas. Do I think it's a good policy for the state? If I were the state of Alaska, I would charge more. The oil and gas industry is basically taking it and running and profiting far more than what they pay back into the state. And mineral exploitation mining companies, they're not paying anywhere near the same amount as what the oil and gas companies are paying. So if I were Alaska, I would increase it exponentially. And really what it comes down to is it's the state of Alaska and the federal government that's going to be, and most importantly, the citizens of Bristol Bay that will be left holding the bag. This isn't a mine that's, they'll mine it for 50 years. There'll be, 1,000 jobs for 50 years. Oh, this was a point that I wanted to go back to. Juxtapose the 1,000 jobs that Pebble's promising with the 12,000 jobs that the commercial fishery employs. So it's really just a very different scenario. But after 50 years, that will be gone. Potentially there'll be this huge mining industrial region of Bristol Bay. Once Pebble Mine goes, it's the first domino. All the roads will go in, the port will go in, and other mines will be developed in the area. And you're left with a scenario that could be economically devastating, particularly to the people of the region who have a subsistence-based lifestyle. And to me, that's the crux of the problem. You're taking away their way of life. You're giving 50 years of a mine, and you're leaving this region with toxic waste, 10 billion, upwards to 10 billion tons of it, that's going to have to be treated forever. And I mentioned earlier in the talk that this is an earthquake prone area. It's a seismically active area. It's not a matter of when an earthquake is going to hit. Or if an earthquake is going to hit. It's when. So there's going to be a disaster. We don't know when. We know it will happen. Most likely, the mining companies will have left at that point. They'll have washed their hands, and it will be up to the state of Alaska and EPA and the people to go in and remediate. So really, it's a taxpayer issue for everybody. Another question is, I live in New York State, and the Great Lakes area is the largest fresh water area in the world, and we are fighting fracking. How can you convince people that fresh water and the nature that goes along with it is priceless? You said it, it's priceless. For the Alaska, for Bristol Bay, Alaska, water is the pulse of the region. It supports the salmon. It supports the people. It is, salmon is the lifeblood of the region, and it's all based on pure water. This is water that's untouched, and water that's touched by fracking, by the chemicals used, by runoff, by any sort of pollution in the Great Lakes, I mean, that is obviously a giant problem, one that NRDC's and many other groups are working on. And, until somebody doesn't have pure water, until somebody loses a resource that is so important to them, it's hard to convince people on a visceral level, particularly when a lot of money is at stake, as is the case with fracking and mining. I have another question, and that's, Taryn, can you speak to how various environmental protection organizations like NRDC work together in coalitions? Well, every coalition is different. I can tell you that the coalition that's banded together to fight pebble mine is, to say the least, unpredicted and bedfellows, but it's a coalition that really works. Typically, we're not on the same side necessarily as commercial fishermen or as, sportsmen and sports fishermen. We're trying to protect resources. They're trying to exploit resources, different resources. But one thing is certain in this coalition and in others, and that is pebble mine is such a great threat that it's banded together all these unlikely bedfellows into, a very loose coalition, but one that works together nonetheless. And I think, to answer the question directly, it's about communication with your coalition partners and knowing who's going to take the lead on what issues. For instance, NRDC, we don't have a huge base in Alaska. So we're not going to be as effective for local and state issues as a group like BBNC or Nunamta Lukstai, who are on the ground in Bristol Bay working on these issues. We're not going to be as effective as Trout Unlimited, who's in Juneau working on these issues. But where we can be effective is using our 1.4 million members and activists and activating the base and lobbying EPA and working with our congressional delegations to find support for EPA to, prohibit or restrict pebble mine under Section 404C of the Clean Water Act. So all of those things complement each other. NRDC is running a larger international campaign focused on the foreign and mining companies. So we've every year gone to the shareholder meetings from 2010 to 2013. We've presented Anglo-American, Rio Tinto, and Mitsubishi with, over 1 million petitions of protests from people around the world saying that pebble mine is a bad idea. It's an environmental risk. It's a reputational risk to your companies to go forward when you do not have the support from the region. And Anglo-American and Rio Tinto are still involved, but Mitsubishi, a year after we presented these petitions, it withdrew 100%, withdrew 100% of its investment in Northern Dynasty Minerals and in the pebble mine. So we know that these campaigns can be effective. We're pushing Rio Tinto to be a responsible leader and to do the same thing with its investment in pebble mine and in Northern Dynasty Minerals. We saw an open split with the leadership of Rio Tinto in 2012 when then CEO Tom Albanese said, we don't want to see an open pit mine. And that's pretty much the design plan put forward by Northern Dynasty Minerals and the Pebble Limited Partnership, both in filings with the state of Alaska in 2006 for water rights permits and filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission in 2011. So we're starting to see splits, and in terms of coalition, every one of us just keeps into contact and, shares what we're doing and, works, for the end goal. The next question is, would companies have to provide plans to return the land to some sense of its prior pristine state? Doesn't sound like this is realistic or how these companies are held accountable. So they are required to post a bond, but the bond will not nearly cover what would be at stake should there be some sort of catastrophic failure. In terms of reclamation, parts of it could be reclaimed. Obviously, you've already destroyed, hundreds of miles of streams, thousands of miles of wetlands. And that in and of itself has an impact. Part of what makes the Bristol Bay fishery so extraordinary is the biodiversity that's there amongst the salmon. And you get that by having all these different genetic makeups and genetic populations all over. And you start to shatter that when you destroy just all of these streams and wetlands that are interconnected just off the bat to build this mine. So there's a certain amount of reclamation that just can't happen. The second part of that question was, doesn't sound like this is too realistic. You're right. It would never, no matter what these companies do, there's no way to put it back to the state in which it is now. Right now, it's pristine. It's untouched. The mining companies would build roads, would build bridges, would build culverts, all of which will impede, salmon migration, salmon spawning, and I think most importantly, there's going to be a giant tailings dams with 10 billion tons of essentially battery acid that's going to have to be held forever. And that's going to be the real problem. All of this toxic waste can't be reclaimed. There's 10 billion tons of it, and that's what's going to have to be managed in perpetuity. You'll never get back to the pristine state. Okay, this is the last question, and oh my gosh, it's already 5 minutes till. So this is the last question. Have there been other mining ventures like this that have been defeated anywhere? Good question, and I honestly, this would be the world's biggest mine, so or North America's biggest mine. So none like this in North America. I can't speak for the rest of the world. There's nothing that's popping out in my head, but what makes Bristol Bay so extraordinary is the level of opposition that's there and that's lined up. And this is something that Anglo-American, that Northern Dynasty Minerals, and that Rio Tinto is going to face, this unrelenting opposition. And they've faced it for years. They're going to face it if they try to push this towards permitting. We're going to continue to ask EPA to prohibit or restrict large-scale mines like the Pebble Mine in the Bristol Bay watershed. We're going to ask EPA to use its authority under Section 404C of the Clean Water Act. We're going to continue to push this for as long as I'm able to campaign. This NRDC is committed to this. I know other groups are committed to this. For the folks that live in Bristol Bay, this is absolutely their future. There was a really great documentary produced by Trout Unlimited called Red Gold, and if any of you have the opportunity to watch it, I would suggest it. And there's more recently another documentary done by a very new artist, and it's called We Can't Eat Gold. And there you have these poignant tales of the people that will be most affected, of the Alaskan natives who have for generations hunted and fished and depended on salmon. And you have them talking about how it's their cultural identity, how salmon is the lifeblood of their families and of the region and the way that they survive. And those are the people that are going to be fighting the longest and the hardest to stop this mine, and that will be unrelenting. So I thank everybody for listening to me. If you have any questions, you can feel free to contact NRDC. The website that I would send you to about our Pebble Mine campaign is www.stoppebble.org. You can visit NRDC's Biogem page, which details our campaign on Pebble Mine, or some of our coalition partners' websites are very good as well. SaveBristolBay.org, ourbristolbay.org. Those are all very good websites to give you background information should you want to do more to protect species like the brown bears and the salmon that you see on your screen now. So thank you very much. I appreciate your questions. They were all wonderful, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.